Hi, my name's Stephen Monro and I've been involved with the Pakenham SES now for the last 18 years or so. I'd like to share a story about a core vehicle in our fleet that has been with us for a very long time. So much so that it's been in the unit longer than many of our current serving members. In late July of this year, 2019, after 23 years of service, we farewell our beloved Rescue 1. It was a 2001 Ford F350 XL. Now, looking back, it seems a little silly to be sad about retiring a vehicle, but you see, this truck had served our unit and our community very well as our primary road rescue response vehicle. It's incredibly practical and probably one of, if not the most reliable vehicle in our fleet of vehicles over the years. It has been a favourite truck amongst many of our members who often discussed about who the truck actually belongs to. The most common measurement, though, of possession being of who has driven it the most frequently. But I digress. What you're about to hear is a historical story of the development and history of the vehicle that was compiled by a founding member of the unit, Ian Richardson. While not as active as he used to be, he still pops in every now and then. As a builder, designer, researcher, and many other things with this truck, Ian contributed a considerable amount of dedication to the service and the delivery of this vehicle. So in a way, this is really his story, and it's my pleasure to be able to share it with you. But please join me on this journey back in history. Now, to give background on the time frame of this vehicle, it's important to know that the Pakenham State Emergency Service began back in 1979 with a crew of just 6 members and an ex-Sunnycrust bread van that was capable of a top speed of 60 kilometres per hour. Believe it or not, this vehicle was also donated by Bunge Australia. Now, Pakenham SES was very small, not only in numbers, but in building size. And oh, how we have grown since those humble beginnings. The first headquarters was actually a cowshed at the then controller's house, Mr. Alan Morgan, a local bylaws officer, and it was at his property approximately 5 kilometres outside of the Pakenham CBD. Now fast forward to the late 1980s and the Pakenham unit decided that their ageing 1960s International XMFB snailback primary rescue vehicle, that was Pakenham Rescue 1, needed to be updated. Considerable discussions took place about the type of vehicle required and the cost involved. And due to the recent acquisition of a state-issued Nissan 4x4, it was decided that the Holden Rodeo 4x4, which had been our storm-damaged vehicle, should be traded in for a Ford F-150 cab chassis, to which a custom body would be fitted. In November 1989, we took possession of the Ford F-150 and arranged for Cook's Bodybuilders to fit a tray body with side boxes and a ladder racks similar to the standard SEC type body for a cost of about $5,000. This took about 1 month, and on return, the members set about installing generator, compressor, compressed air lines, 240 volt and 12 volt wiring. And this vehicle was then commissioned 4 months later in March 1990. Unfortunately though, from the start, this vehicle was plagued with problems. Even though the empty body was large enough to carry all of the rescue equipment, the gross vehicle mass, the GVM, exceeded the manufacturer's design limit, 3,360 kilos by about 200 kilos. Now, to overcome this type of problem, the spare tyre and all of the fuel in the rear tank and some of the equipment was removed. Not an ideal situation, as you can imagine. Now, you may ask, why was there a weight problem? Well, the body from Cook's was built like Fort Knox, and even though the available payload for the basic cab chassis was 1,626 kilos, the body itself weighed 1,125 kilos, realistically leaving only 501 kilos for all of the equipment and the occupants. Not much weight, really. See, due to the constant bickering about this vehicle, in October 91, which was approximately only 18 months later, it was decided that the Ford F-150 should be replaced with the Ford F350 4x4, which should in theory provide a greater payload and hence alleviate all of the overweight problems. Now, in December of 1991, the original Cook's body was fitted to our newly purchased Ford F350 cab chassis. Well, as with all things, when not a lot of pre-planning took place, the 350 was overweight as well. This vehicle had a GVM of 3,900 kilos on paper, some 530 kilos more than the original F150. But you see, the actual payload for this vehicle was only 1,865 kilos, which was some measly 220 kilos more than the F50 that we'd already just gotten rid of. You see, quite a lot of discussion now took place, and it was decided to write to Ford customer service section explaining the problem and asking advice on how to go about increasing the standard GVM of the vehicle. Surprisingly enough, within a month, we received a letter and a re-rated compliance certificate back from Ford truck section indicating that if we increase the tyre pressure to 550 kPa, that's 80 psi, and the front tyre to 500 kPa, that's 72 psi, then the vehicle would be rated at 4,400 kilos, some 500 kilos more than the standard rating. This information was supplied to Vic Roads, and sometime later we were informed that the re-rating was approved. We spent some $10,000 to get an increase of only 220 kilos, while for the cost of 2 letters, we received an extra 500 kilos. For the next 2 years, we went along complaining that the Cook's body was not well suited to our role and that a specialist body should be constructed. Eventually, in 1993, it was decided that enough was enough, and on the proviso that funding could be arranged, then a custom body would be constructed for Rescue 1. A working party was established for the development of a construction design, and from this committee it was decided that the design from Knox SES Unit's Rescue 1 body would be used. The working party took photos of the Knox vehicle and, armed with these photos, went to 3 well-known vehicle body builders to obtain quotations. The body prices varied in price from $7,000 to $21,000, with only Vaudrey bodybuilders being prepared to build the structural section out of aluminium. Aluminium, being the structural material used in the Knox body, was probably the best option available, just because it wasn't that heavy. The quotation from Vaudrey was some $15,000, and a submission to the Andrews Foundation, a local beloved organisation I might add, was written to for this amount. On a side note, the Andrews Foundation was set up by Ronald Clifford Andrews. He founded the Pakenham Blue Metal Quarry at the top of Mount Shamrock Road. While as an entrepreneur, he had made great wealth and fortune, but Ron's philosophy was simply this: to give back. In December 1993, the Andrews Foundation replied indicating that the amount indicated in the submission would be provided for the vehicle body construction. In June 1994, the money from the Andrews Foundation became available, but as it had been more than 12 months since the initial quote, new quotes had to be obtained. When we returned to the original bodybuilders Vaudrey, they were no longer interested in the construction. Without Vaudrey, the other standard bodybuilders would not build the superstructure out of aluminium, and construction out of steel, well, as I said, was too heavy. So we therefore went to other engineering firms and bus builders to obtain quotes, and these quotes from an engineering firm was selected to construct the body for some $13,800. Prior to construction, it was deemed that the SES was issuing a multi-purpose vehicle, MP for short, which had been requested as a replacement for the 4B. This new MP would be to serve as our primary rescue vehicle until the body had been constructed for the 350. In October 1994, we took possession of our MP vehicle and then negotiated with the engineering firm on a start date. The engineering firm indicated that the work would not be done until February 1995, and that on the receipt of the vehicle, the construction would take 4 to 6 weeks. You see, another issue had to be resolved prior to construction, and that was the method used to drive the 13.5 kilowatt 3-phase alternator used to power all the rescue equipment. Two methods were seen to be possible, either directly coupled to a PTO with a vehicle engine governed, or else using hydraulic pumps and motors, but again, coupled to the engine via a PTO. You see, this is where it gets a little more technical. And when designing a vehicle like this, lots of these things have to be considered. Let me tell you more. The advantage of the hydraulic configuration that was a compensatory pump could be used, thus the engine RPM would not be required to be governed, e.g. the RPM set to say at 1700 RPM, no load, and then when load was applied, the variation in RPM to say 1300 RPM would not affect the rotational speed of the hydraulic motor. This initially seemed the perfect solution, but upon further investigation and discussion with the Lilydale SES unit, whom had actually also employed this configuration in both their Rescue 1 and 2 vehicle, it was indicated that large oil reserves would be required to dissipate the additional heat generated. You see, hydraulic pumps and motors are only about 85% efficient, and therefore, if the load was in fact 13.5 kilowatts, then there would be approximately 2 kilowatts of heat to dissipate in the oil. This type of dissipation would require about 200 litres of an oil reserve, and that's a lot of heavy oil, or a hydraulic oil cooler, which is expensive and requires noisy 12-volt fans. So we return to the direct coupled PTO with lay shafts and belts. This type of configuration is some 98% energy efficient, thus only a very small amount of additional heat is generated, which it can be naturally dissipated. The disadvantage of this system is that it requires a complex governor. Even so, this was the method that was to be employed. In February 1995, the old steel body was removed from our 350 and the cab chassis was delivered to the engineering firm. Now, some 4 weeks later, which is quite a long time, the vehicle and partially completed structure was delivered to the PTO generator contractor. Australian Tipping had been contracted to provide the PTO unit and construct the mounting hardware for the alternator IC shaft belts and drive shafts. The PTO unit was a Chelsea unit, and the gears had to be imported from America as they did not exist in Australia. Even though this had been known by Australian Tipping for some time, they had not ordered the gears, and this also took some 4 weeks to arrive from the USA. Another delay was the use of 75 min tooth timing belt for the main drive from the IC shaft to the alternator. It took in total some 6 weeks to get the vehicle back from Australian Tipping. When the vehicles returned to the engineering firm, the construction just lagged on and on. Most of the problems were centred around the use of aluminium for the entire construction and the extremely complicated design construction components, e.g. the rollout bin, the lift out and up doors, the telescopic central light mast, the hydrovane installation, and the rollout rear toolbar. The lift out and up doors, even though similar to the construction of Knox doors, did not employ the same mechanics, and therefore air struts used to hold up the doors were remounted and modified in the design some 5 times. The firm owner was becoming quite deluded with the whole process, and on many occasions the body would sit for weeks at a time with no additional work taking place. In November, it was apparent that if construction was to ever be completed, then the designer, with one of our members, Mr. Ian Richardson, would have to work with the engineering firm on the vehicle. Mr. Richardson took 4 weeks off during Christmas break and spent most of his time at the engineering firm constructing the body. By the time Mr. Richardson returned to work, the body had been completed, all except for internal dividers and the roll-out toolbar. The body was placed on the vehicle and returned to the SES so that Mr. Richardson could finalise minor exterior changes prior to painting. In February 1996, some 12 months after the vehicle was taken off the road, it was delivered to the panel beater for painting. The paint used was a white 2-pack compound delivering extremely high surface scratch resistance. The body of the roof was constructed out of 3mm aluminium checker plate, and it was possible to walk on the painted roof. In later March 1996, the vehicle was picked up from the paintworks. During the evolution of the vehicle, as it had taken so long, some other projects had also come to fruition. For some time, the unit had been petitioning VHQ for replacement RAR equipment, as their Lucas equipment used by the unit had been purchased in 1984, and it was now some 10 years old. In October 1995, VHQ provided new Lucas spreaders, shears, and an additional $1,000 provided the unit for a simultaneous electronic hydraulic pump. Due to the inclusion of the new rescue equipment, it was decided to install a pump permanently in the new vehicle and install 2 18-metre hydraulic hose reels in the rear compartments. These reels were to be permanently plumbed to the pump. And in May 1996, Mr. Richardson took another 2 weeks off work and returned to the bodybuilder to complete the rear rollout toolbar. And once this item was completed, the bodybuilder was discharged from his primary responsibility. From late March 1996 until October, Mr. Richardson and Mr. McDowell worked on the vehicle most weekends and at least one other day per fortnight to install all of the air, 240 volt, 12 volt hydraulic requirements and engine governor. It's believed that in excess of 400 hours were spent installing just these items. On October the 10th, 1996, the vehicle was finally commissioned. After the commissioning, the vehicle was plagued with some minor problems, and the worst being the governing unit. The initial governor employed was a modified command auto cruise control, but after extensive testing and modification, it was so unreliable that the unit had to be scrapped. After many phone calls, an electronic engine governor manufacturer was located. The company Heinzmann produced an excellent product that, even though quite expensive for some $1,600 for the cheapest unit, was very reliable. The system employed on the vehicle with live hydraulic engaged in the hose reels has proved itself to be such an efficient system. And it was so efficient and ahead of its time that from turning up to a scene, the hydraulic tools could be live and working within 30 seconds. And this is something that most other rescue units could have only ever dreamt of at that time. The only slight downfall to this system is that the vehicle has to almost be right on scene. The truck end with 18 metres of hose reel had to be right there to be able to perform a rescue. Although there are extensions for both reels of 15 metres, it was decided that in the middle of 2002 to add air bottles to the vehicle so that in the event of the job was way off track, rescue could still be performed more efficiently. Although rescue could still be performed at that stage with the porta-packs, which is hand-operated hydraulics, it was decided to fit air bottles to the truck. And these air bottles make it possible to run the air over hydraulic tool to power the hydraulic tools without the use of the vehicle. Now, fast forward a few years, and a brand new F350 was purchased. The current body that was retired. That body from the previous 350 was then attached to it, and after having some minor repairs and a respray, Swallow Engineering and Pakenham was the group that attached the body to the new vehicles. And Australian Tipping then fitted a PTO to the truck using a similar system as before to power the generator and air compressor, both mounted inside the complex aluminium bodywork. Our previous rescue ones served the community well. It had been a body that was custom designed and built by unit members in 1995 to 96 who worked tirelessly to make it perfect. And since that time, it has only undergone a few minor alterations to accommodate different tools or maybe new rescue equipment. The vehicle was a pleasure to use, drive, look at, and you knew that when you rolled up to a scene, you had all the gear that you needed to rescue those in need.